I stood in front of an empty lot where my father's workshop used to be, staring at nothing but dirt and tire tracks, my hands trembling with a rage I hadn't felt since the day we buried him 6 months ago. The building that had housed decades of his life's work, his inventions, his legacy, was gone, reduced to rubble and hauled away like garbage. My name is Thomas Young, and I'm a software engineer from San Jose, California. When my father passed away last November, I inherited his property in Meadowbrook Hills, a planned community in Henderson, Nevada, just outside Las Vegas. Dad had lived there for 20 years, and that workshop behind his house was his sanctuary. He was an inventor, a tinkerer, a genius who never quite got the recognition he deserved while he was alive. I knew he had been working on something important in those final years, but I never imagined just how important. The past 6 months had been a blur of grief, estate paperwork, and flying back and forth between California and Nevada. I kept the house maintained, paid all the bills on time, and visited at least twice a month. The workshop I left untouched. I wasn't ready to go through his things, to face the reality that he was really gone, so I locked it up and told myself I'd deal with it when I was ready. Apparently, the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association had other plans. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the demolition notice that had been mailed to my address in San Jose. It had arrived 3 days after the fact, which seemed convenient for them. A woman answered on the third ring. "Meadowbrook Hills HOA, this is Patricia speaking. This is Thomas Young. I own the property at 847 Sagebrush Lane. Someone demolished a building on my property without my permission." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Mr. Young, according to our records, that structure was deemed abandoned and in violation of multiple HOA covenants. We sent several notices." "I never received any notices, and the building wasn't abandoned. My father passed away and I've been managing the estate. We sent notices to the property address as required by our bylaws. If you weren't residing there, that's not our responsibility." My jaw clenched. "You demolished a building that didn't belong to you. That's destruction of property. That's illegal." "Mr. Young, I suggest you review your HOA agreement, Section 12. Subsection 4 clearly states that any structure appearing abandoned or in disrepair for more than 90 days can be removed at the owner's expense after proper notice. The structure in question had broken windows, peeling paint, and hadn't been accessed in months, according to our records. My father literally died 6 months ago. I've been settling his estate. The building was locked and secured. Nevertheless, it was in violation. You'll be receiving a bill for the demolition costs, approximately $8,000 plus administrative fees. Have a nice day, Mr. Young." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. $8,000. They wanted me to pay them for destroying my property. I drove to the HOA office, a small building near the community entrance with manicured lawns and a fountain out front. Inside, a receptionist directed me to Patricia Monroe's office. Patricia was exactly what I expected. A woman in her late 40s with an aggressive blonde bob, too much makeup, and a condescending smile that probably worked on most people. "Mr. Young, I wasn't expecting you in person. I want to see the notices you claim you sent." She pulled out a file with my property address on it. Inside were copies of 3 letters, dated 4 months ago, 3 months ago, and 2 months ago. According to the documents, they'd been sent to 847 Sagebrush Lane, not my actual mailing address in San Jose. "These were sent to an empty house," I said. "My father's mail was being forwarded to me. These never came through. We're only required to send them to the property address. It's in the bylaws." "Which I'm sure you know would make it easy to claim someone didn't respond. Let me see the photos you took to justify this." She hesitated, then pulled out several printed photographs. They showed the workshop from various angles. Sure, the paint was peeling. It was an old building. And yes, one of the high windows had a crack in it from a storm last year, but it was hardly a condemned structure. "This is your evidence? Some peeling paint and a cracked window?" The appearance standards in Meadowbrook Hills are very clear. All structures must be maintained to community standards. This building was an eyesore and lowering property values. It was behind the house, barely visible from the street. It was visible from the Henderson's second-story window. They complained multiple times. Of course they did. I remembered the Hendersons. They'd feuded with my father for years over everything from his grass height to where he parked his car. Fine. I want to see the debris. Where did you take everything? Patricia's smile faltered. The structure was demolished and disposed of as per standard procedure. Everything? You didn't inventory anything inside? Mr. Young, the building appeared abandoned. We had no reason to believe there was anything of value inside. You didn't even check? You just demolished it and threw everything away? We peeked through the windows. We saw old furniture, tools, boxes, junk essentially. My blood ran cold. Where is it now? The demolition company handles disposal, most likely the landfill. I left the office before I said something I'd regret. Outside, I sat in my car and tried to calm down. My father's life work, potentially decades of research and prototypes, was sitting in a landfill somewhere because Patricia Monroe thought his workshop was an eyesore. I called my father's attorney, Bernard Shapiro, who'd handled the estate. He listened to my story and let out a long sigh. Thomas, I'm sorry this happened. The HOA was legally required to make a reasonable effort to contact you. Sending notices to an empty house when they could have easily found your actual address through public records is questionable at best. Can I sue them? Absolutely. But first, you need to document everything. Get copies of all their records, find out exactly what was in that workshop, and determine the value of what was destroyed. If you can prove they destroyed valuable property, you have a strong case for damages. The problem is, I don't know exactly what was in there. I knew Dad was working on something big, but he was secretive about it. He just kept saying he was on the verge of a breakthrough. Did he keep records? Patents, blueprints, anything? Maybe. He had a computer in there, but who knows if they trashed that too. Find the demolition company. See if there's any way to recover anything. In the meantime, I'll draft a letter to the HOA, putting them on notice that we're pursuing legal action. I spent the rest of the day tracking down Desert Demolition, the company the HOA had hired. Their office was in an industrial area of Henderson, and the owner, a gruff man named Rick, actually seemed sympathetic when I explained the situation. Look, I feel bad about this, he said. We were told it was abandoned, full of junk. We knocked it down, loaded everything into trucks, and took it to the North Las Vegas landfill. That was 8 days ago. Is there any chance any of it is still recoverable? He shook his head. 8 days? That stuff is buried under tons of other garbage by now. I'm sorry, man. I drove to the landfill anyway, hoping for a miracle. The manager there confirmed what Rick had said. The debris had been dumped in Sector 7, which was already covered by several layers of subsequent garbage. Retrieving anything would require excavating tons of waste at a cost that would be astronomical. I went back to my father's house as the sun was setting. The empty space where the workshop had stood looked wrong, like a missing tooth. I walked around the foundation, which they'd left intact, looking for anything they might have missed. There was nothing but concrete and dirt. Inside the house, I started going through my father's papers more thoroughly than I had before. Most of it was mundane, bills and receipts, letters from friends. But in his office closet, I found a fireproof safe I'd overlooked during my initial inventory. I tried his usual combinations, birthdays and anniversaries. Nothing worked. I called my Aunt Linda, my father's sister, who still lived in Colorado. "Tommy, how are you holding up?" she asked. "I've been better. Aunt Linda, did Dad ever mention a safe combination to you?" "A safe?" "No, I don't think so. Why?" I explained what had happened with the workshop. She was horrified. "Those vultures! Your father spent 20 years in that workshop. He was so proud of his work. Did he ever tell you what he was working on?" "He was always vague about it. Something about renewable energy, I think. He said it was going to change everything, but you know how your father was. Always dreaming big." After we hung up, I sat staring at the safe. Renewable energy. Dad had been an electrical engineer before he retired. He'd worked for solar companies, wind energy projects, had a dozen patents to his name for various improvements to existing technologies. But he always said those were incremental. He wanted something revolutionary. I tried more combinations. His employee number from his last job. His parents' anniversary. Nothing. Then I tried my birthday, and the safe clicked open. Inside were notebooks, dozens of them, filled with my father's cramped handwriting, schematics, calculations, and diagrams. I pulled them out carefully and started reading. It took me hours to make sense of his shorthand and technical jargon, but slowly a picture emerged. My father had invented a new type of energy storage system, not a battery in the conventional sense, but something that used a crystalline matrix to store electrical energy at a density far beyond anything currently available. According to his notes, his prototype could store 10 times the energy of a lithium-ion battery of the same size, charge in minutes instead of hours, and last for decades without degradation. If this was real, if it worked, it was worth millions, maybe tens of millions. But the prototype and all his testing equipment had been in the workshop. I barely slept that night. By morning, I'd read through every notebook twice. My father had been meticulous. He'd documented every experiment, every failure, every success. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before he died. He'd written, "Final prototype complete, efficiency at 94%, ready for testing. This is it. This is the one." I took photos of every page and uploaded them to secure cloud storage. Then I called Bernard Shapiro. "I need you to file that lawsuit immediately, and I need a patent attorney, the best you can find." "What did you find, Thomas?" "My father invented something that could revolutionize energy storage, and the HOA threw it in the garbage." Bernard was quiet for a moment. "How much are we talking about?" "Millions, potentially. I need to get it verified by experts, but based on his notes, this is legitimate. This is huge." "Then we need to move fast. I'll have a lawsuit filed by end of business today. And I know someone at a firm in Los Angeles who specializes in patent law. Her name is Jennifer Martinez. I'll make an introduction." I met Jennifer Martinez via video call that afternoon. She was sharp, asked good questions, and didn't waste time. "Based on what you're telling me, your father's invention could be patentable even without the prototype," she said. "The notebooks are dated, detailed, and show a clear progression of development. That establishes prior art and inventorship. But we need to move quickly. If anyone else is working on similar technology, we need to file before they do." "How long will it take?" "To draft a comprehensive patent application. With the detail you're describing, at least a month. But I can file a provisional patent application within a week. That gives us a year to file the full application while establishing your priority date." "Do it, whatever it costs. I'll need copies of all the notebooks, and I'll need you to walk me through the technical aspects. Are you familiar enough with your father's work to do that?" "I'm a software engineer, not an electrical engineer, but I can learn, and I can find experts to consult." Over the next week, I became an expert in my father's invention. I contacted several professors at UNLV's engineering department, showing them the notebooks under non-disclosure agreements. Their reactions ranged from skeptical to awestruck. Dr. Sarah Chen, a materials science professor, spent 3 hours going through the calculations. "This is revolutionary," she said finally. "If he actually built a working prototype with these specifications, it would be worth a fortune. Companies like Tesla, Panasonic, Samsung, they'd all want this technology." "Can you verify that the science is sound?" "The theoretical framework is solid. The crystalline matrix he describes is complex but possible. Without testing the actual prototype, I can't confirm it works, but there's no obvious reason it shouldn't. Your father was brilliant." Armed with expert opinions, Jennifer filed the provisional patent application. Bernard filed a lawsuit against the Meadowbrook Hills HOA for destruction of property, seeking damages in excess of $10 million. The number made headlines. Local news picked up the story. HOA destroys inventor's $1 million workshop. Suddenly, I was getting calls from journalists, documentary producers, and people claiming they could help for a cut of the profits. Patricia Monroe called me directly, her voice shaking. "Mr. Young, this lawsuit is absurd. We followed all proper procedures. You demolished a building without verifying its contents and disposed of property worth millions of dollars. You're liable for those damages. We had no way of knowing there was anything valuable inside. You didn't bother to check. You saw an opportunity to get rid of a building you didn't like, and you took it. Now you're going to pay for it. The HOA doesn't have $10 million. Then you should have thought of that before you destroyed my father's life work." She hung up. 2 days later, I received a settlement offer from the HOA's attorney, $25,000 and a waiver of the demolition fees. I laughed and told Bernard to reject it. The case moved forward. The HOA tried to get it dismissed, arguing they'd followed proper procedures and couldn't have known about the value of the workshop's contents. But the judge wasn't sympathetic. The defendants had a duty to make reasonable efforts to contact the plaintiff, Judge Morrison said during a preliminary hearing. Sending notices exclusively to a property they knew to be vacant when the plaintiff's actual address was readily available through public records and estate filings does not constitute reasonable effort. Furthermore, demolishing a locked structure without first inventorying its contents shows a reckless disregard for the property owner's rights. This case will proceed to trial. The HOA's insurance company got involved. They hired a big law firm from Las Vegas to defend the case. Those attorneys were good, I had to admit. They argued that my father's notebooks didn't prove the prototype existed, that his invention might not have worked, that the value I was claiming was speculative. So I had to prove it worked. With Dr. Chen's help, I assembled a team of graduate students and engineers. Using my father's detailed notes, we attempted to recreate his prototype. It took 3 months and cost me $50,000 of my own money, but in late May, we successfully built a working model. The testing results were even better than my father's notes had indicated. The energy storage density was remarkable. The charge time was under 5 minutes. The system showed no degradation after 1,000 charge-discharge cycles. Dr. Chen called it a breakthrough. Thomas, you need to get this in front of investors immediately. This isn't just worth millions. This could be worth hundreds of millions. But first, I had to win the lawsuit. The trial began on a humid Monday morning in late June at the Clark County District Court in Las Vegas. The courtroom was packed with journalists, curious onlookers, and representatives from several energy companies who'd gotten wind of the technology. The HOA's attorneys came out swinging. Their opening statement painted my father as a hoarder, the workshop as a decrepit eyesore, and me as an opportunistic son trying to cash in on a tragedy. The plaintiff wants you to believe that this old workshop contained priceless technology, their lead attorney, a polished man named Gregory Ross, told the jury. But where's the evidence? Some old notebooks that could describe anything? A new prototype that may or may not match what was supposedly in that workshop? The truth is, Mr. Young neglected his inherited property, ignored HOA notices, and now wants to blame others for his own failure to maintain his father's legacy. It was effective. I could see some jurors nodding. Then it was our turn. Bernard Shapiro stood up, and his opening statement was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a homeowners association that prioritized aesthetics over basic human decency and legal responsibility. When Thomas Young's father died, Thomas was grieving. He was managing an estate, settling affairs, trying to cope with the loss of his last living parent. The HOA knew this. They had access to public death records. They knew the property had just gone through probate. And yet, they deliberately sent notices only to an empty house, ensuring Thomas wouldn't receive them. Why? Because Patricia Monroe, the HOA president, wanted that workshop gone. Neighbors had complained. It didn't fit their perfect suburban vision. So they manufactured a reason to demolish it, and they did it quickly, without proper inventory, without due diligence, without any regard for what might be inside. He paused, walking over to a table covered with my father's notebooks. Deal. These notebooks represent 20 years of work by Leonard Young, a brilliant engineer with a dozen patents to his name. His final invention, a revolutionary energy storage system, was real. It existed, and the defendant destroyed it. Not only did they destroy it, they refused to take responsibility for their actions. They want you to believe that it's Thomas's fault for not living in his dead father's house to collect mail. That's not how the law works. That's not how basic human decency works. And by the end of this trial, you're going to see exactly how much damage the Meadowbrook Hills HOA caused. Over the next 2 weeks, we presented our case. Dr. Chen testified about the technological significance of my father's invention and the successful recreation of the prototype. I testified about my father's work, his secretive nature about his final project, and the devastation of discovering his workshop demolished. Bernard presented evidence that the HOA had my actual mailing address available through public estate records, but chose not to use it. The most damaging testimony came from Martha Henderson, the neighbor who'd complained about the workshop. Under cross-examination by Bernard, she admitted that Patricia Monroe had assured her they'd find a way to get rid of that eyesore months before the demolition notices were sent. So Mrs. Monroe had already decided to demolish the workshop before any notices were sent? Bernard asked. Well, I suppose so, yes. And she asked you to file complaints to create a paper trail justifying that demolition? Martha hesitated. She said it would help if there were documented complaints about the property's appearance. The HOA's attorneys tried to recover. They brought in their own experts who questioned whether the new prototype truly matched my father's original design. They argued that even if the technology was valuable, there was no way to prove the prototype in the workshop was functional. But we had an ace in the hole. While going through my father's financial records more carefully, I'd found receipts for specialized materials and components purchased in the months before his death. Those receipts matched exactly with the materials needed to build the energy storage system. More importantly, I'd found a video. It was on an old USB drive in the safe, something I'd overlooked initially. The video showed my father in his workshop, dated 3 weeks before he died, demonstrating the prototype. In the video, he charged the device in under 4 minutes, then used it to power his entire workshop for 6 hours straight. "This is it," he said on the video, his voice filled with pride. 20 years of work and it finally works. This is going to change everything. When we played that video in court, several jurors wiped their eyes. The HOA's attorneys looked stunned. There was no longer any question that the prototype had existed, that it worked, and that the HOA had destroyed it. Patricia Monroe took the stand in her own defense, and it did not go well for her. Bernard dismantled her testimony piece by piece. "Mrs. Monroe, you had access to public records showing Mr. Young's California address, correct?" "I don't personally check public records for every property owner." "But you could have, especially when dealing with an estate property where the owner had recently died." "I suppose, but that's not standard procedure." "What is standard procedure when you're about to demolish someone's building?" "We send notices to the property address as required by our bylaws." "Even when you know no one is living there?" "The bylaws don't require us to track down owners at other addresses." "But you're not opposed to doing so when it suits you, are you?" "I have here a copy of correspondence you sent to Robert Martinez regarding a fence violation. Mr. Martinez also lives out of state and rents his Meadowbrook Hills property. Yet you sent this notice to his Texas address, not to the rental property. Why the double standard?" Patricia's face reddened. "That was different. We had his forwarding address on file. You also had Thomas Young's address on file from his estate paperwork. You chose not to use it. Why?" "I don't recall making that decision specifically." "Is it because you wanted that workshop demolished regardless of whether Mr. Young responded to the notices?" "No, we follow proper procedures." "Then why did you tell Martha Henderson you'd find a way to get rid of that eyesore months before any violations were documented?" "I don't remember saying that." "Mrs. Henderson remembers it quite clearly. Are you calling her a liar?" "No, I just think she misunderstood." Bernard pulled out more evidence. Emails between Patricia and other HOA board members discussing the workshop, messages complaining about its appearance, and a particularly damning email where Patricia wrote, "If we send the notices to the property address, he'll never get them, and we can proceed with removal." The jury was out for less than 3 hours. They found in my favor on all counts: improper notice, destruction of property, and negligence. The damages, $12 million. The courtroom erupted. Patricia Monroe burst into tears. The HOA's attorneys immediately filed notice of appeal, but the insurance company was already making settlement overtures. They knew they'd lost. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me. "Mr. Young, how do you feel about the verdict?" "I feel like justice was served, but nothing can bring back my father or the original prototype he spent years perfecting. This was never about money. It was about holding people accountable for their actions." "What will you do with the settlement?" "First, I'll finish developing my father's invention and get it to market. He deserves to be recognized for his genius. The rest will go to establishing a foundation in his name to support independent inventors. Over the next few months, the HOA's insurance paid out the full judgment. Patricia Monroe resigned in disgrace. The HOA board was completely replaced in a special election by residents angry about the scandal. Several board members faced personal lawsuits from homeowners whose property values had declined due to the negative publicity. But the best part came in September. I'd partnered with a venture capital firm to develop my father's energy storage technology commercially. We filed the full patent application with my father listed as the primary inventor. And we secured a licensing deal with a major electric vehicle manufacturer for an upfront payment of $30 million plus royalties. The system went into production the following year. It became standard in electric vehicles, home energy storage, and grid-scale applications. My father's name, Leonard Young, became synonymous with the breakthrough that made renewable energy practical and affordable on a massive scale. I used some of the money to buy the house next to my father's property in Henderson. I tore down the Hendersons' place after they defaulted on their mortgage, largely due to the scandal. And I built a state-of-the-art research facility on the combined lots. The Leonard Young Innovation Center now employs 50 engineers and researchers working on renewable energy technologies. And in front of the building, clearly visible from the street, I erected a 10-foot-tall bronze statue of my father in his workshop, holding his prototype. The plaque reads, Leonard Young, 1954-2024, inventor, father, visionary. His work changed the world. Every time I drive past it, I think about how close it all came to being lost forever, buried in a landfill, because a homeowners association president cared more about property values than people's lives. It's a reminder that sometimes the things that look like junk to some people are treasures to others, that grief needs time and respect, and that power, even small-time HOA power, can do incredible damage when wielded carelessly. The legal precedent from our case changed HOA law across Nevada. State legislators passed a bill requiring HOAs to make reasonable efforts to contact owners at all known addresses before taking destructive action on properties. They're required to inventory contents before demolition. And property owners can now sue for punitive damages, not just actual damages, when HOAs act in bad faith. I still get angry when I think about that morning I stood in front of an empty lot. But the anger is productive now. It drives me to ensure my father's legacy lives on, that his work has the impact he always dreamed it would have. He spent 20 years in that workshop chasing a dream, and he achieved it. The HOA tried to erase that achievement, but they failed. In the end, my father won. His invention is powering millions of vehicles and homes worldwide. His name is on one of the most important patents of the century, and I got to see his dream become reality, even if he didn't live to see it himself. That's worth more than $12 million. That's worth everything. I still live in San Jose, but I visit Henderson regularly to oversee the Innovation Center. Each time I do, I stop by my father's old house, which I've kept exactly as he left it. I sit in his living room, surrounded by his books and his photographs, and I tell him about the latest developments, about the new factories producing his energy storage systems, about the electric cars driving around with his technology inside, about the solar farms storing power for entire cities. I like to think he can hear me. I like to think he knows that his work wasn't lost after all, that it mattered, that it changed everything just like he said it would. And every single time I leave, I walk past that empty space where his workshop used to stand, and I remember. I remember the rage and the grief and the determination to make things right. I remember Patricia Monroe's face when the verdict was read. I remember the moment I first saw my father's video, watching him demonstrate his invention with such pride and joy. But mostly, I remember that justice, real justice, sometimes takes time. It takes effort. It takes refusing to give up even when powerful people tell you that you're wrong, that you have no case, that you should just accept what happened and move on. I didn't move on. I fought back, and I won. Not just for me, for my father, for every person who's ever been bullied by a homeowners association that forgot it exists, to serve homeowners, not to tyrannize them. for every inventor who worked in obscurity, chasing dreams that seemed impossible. The Leonard Young Innovation Center is working on dozens of new projects now, all building on my father's revolutionary approach to energy storage. We've got prototypes that could make electric aircraft practical. We're developing systems that could store enough energy to power remote communities for weeks at a time. We're training the next generation of inventors and engineers, teaching them that impossible is just a word people use when they lack imagination. And we're making sure that my father's story is told. Not just the triumph of his invention, but the near tragedy of its loss. Schools use our case study to teach about intellectual property rights. Law schools use our lawsuit to demonstrate proper procedures for property management. Engineering ethics courses discuss the responsibility that comes with evaluating other people's work. My father always said that the best inventions are the ones that make people's lives better in ways they never expected. His energy storage system does exactly that. It's making electric vehicles affordable for families who never could have owned one before. It's making renewable energy reliable enough to replace fossil fuels. It's proving that one person, working alone in a workshop that some people thought was an eyesore, can change the entire world. Patricia Monroe sends me a check every month, part of her bankruptcy settlement, paying off her personal liability from the lawsuit. It's not much, $300, but I don't cash the checks. I frame them and hang them on the wall of my office at the Innovation Center. A reminder that actions have consequences, that you can't just destroy what other people have built and walk away. The HOA itself was dissolved and reformed with entirely new leadership and bylaws. The new board actually reached out to apologize, which I appreciated. They asked if I'd be willing to serve on an advisory committee to help them develop fair and reasonable property management policies. I agreed, on one condition, that they name the new community guidelines after my father. So now, Meadowbrook Hills operates under the Leonard Young Memorial Fairness Protocols, a set of rules designed to balance community standards with respect for individual property owners and their circumstances. Other HOAs across the country have adopted similar guidelines. It turns out that my father's legacy extends beyond his invention. He's also changing the way communities treat their residents. Last week, I received a letter from a woman in Florida whose HOA had threatened to demolish her late husband's art studio. She had read about our case and used it to push back. The HOA backed down, apologized, and gave her the time she needed to sort through her husband's work at her own pace. She thanked me for fighting, for setting a precedent, for making it possible for her to protect her own husband's legacy. I've received dozens of letters like that. Each one reminds me why this mattered, why it was worth the stress and the money and the endless legal battles. Because it wasn't just about my father. It was about everyone who's ever been in a similar situation, facing down bureaucracy and indifference and people who value rules over human beings. My father taught me that good work speaks for itself, that if you build something worthwhile, eventually people will recognize its value. But he never got to see that validation in his lifetime. He died thinking he was just another failed inventor with a workshop full of junk. I made sure the world knows different. I made sure his name is remembered not as the old man with the eyesore workshop, but as Leonard Young, the inventor who revolutionized energy storage, the man who made the renewable energy revolution possible, the father who inspired his son to fight for what's right, no matter how long it takes. Standing in front of his statue now, watching the sun set over the Innovation Center, I feel something I haven't felt since before he died. Peace. The grief is still there, it always will be. But it's joined by pride, satisfaction, and the certainty that I did everything I could to honor his memory and his work. My phone rings. It's Dr. Chen with news about our latest prototype. We've achieved even higher energy density than my father's original design. She's excited, talking fast about the implications, about how this could open up entirely new applications. I listen, smiling, thinking about how my father would have loved this, how he would have been right there in the lab, asking questions, suggesting improvements, pushing everyone to think bigger. That's amazing, Sarah, I say. Dad would have been proud. He should be, she replies. This is all built on his foundation. We're standing on the shoulders of a giant. That's exactly right. My father was a giant, even if the world didn't recognize it while he lived. But they recognize it now. His work powers vehicles on every continent. His name is on buildings and scholarships and awards. His invention is taught in engineering schools as a breakthrough moment in technology history. And it almost didn't happen. It came within days of being lost forever, crushed and buried in a landfill because Patricia Monroe thought it was an eyesore. But I found those notebooks. I fought that battle. I proved what my father created was worth millions, worth everything. And now the whole world knows it too. That's the real victory. Not the money, not the legal judgment, not even the successful technology. The real victory is that my father's life work wasn't wasted. It mattered. He mattered. And everyone knows it. I head inside the Innovation Center, ready to look at Dr. Chen's new results. There's still work to do, more inventions to create, more dreams to chase. My father may be gone, but his legacy lives on in every person working here, in every device powered by his technology, in every life made better by his brilliance. And that's a legacy no HOA can ever demolish.